Going. So before we do much of anything, any questions, any thoughts? Have you been using some of these story categories and techniques in the last couple weeks, and how have they been working for you if you have?
I have not yet really been saying my story much, but this week, but I know you and I practiced it last week, so I'm just fine tuning.
Yeah, and you're going to share it with us today too, right, Elizabeth?
Okay.
We've got Elizabeth, Cindy, and Josh up today to share their stories. But this has been on my end a lot of fun. I'm learning a lot in the process. And one thing that we wanted, Nancy and I talked about going forward when we are working with all your teams and you guys are heading up the teams, now that you've gone through and we've got today and next week our training, any thoughts on what is working for you that we definitely want to keep doing and amplifying, and anywhere that I could be more clear or you feel like that it could be stronger for your teams? Quick question on that now, and your initial thoughts, and then we might cover even a little bit more in depth next week, because we kind of want to co-create this training for them. Leading up, of course, to your March 2nd sales conference. So any thoughts so far on how this has been going, and anything that I might do differently to, be a service to you all?
No, go ahead, Larry.
Well, I was just going to say, the one thought for me anyway, was when I look at words like insight and connection, and the thought about putting a story behind that, a little insight into the framework of the word connection or the word insight would help me anyway, okay. I guess, with a little straighter path. It was just kind of interesting as far as when I went to do it. I think I almost called you, but just making a moment of insight. For me, I guess I kind of understand it because I've been a part of this, but if I was to say to, my team, let's talk about a moment of insight, I'd want to give them an idea what insight means, within what we're trying to accomplish as a salesperson for Medela, I guess.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Larry.
No, in Park, hey, it's Josh. I think when you and I first started going back and forth and having some one-on-one chats and some interaction, I think the hardest part for me, I think the first go around we were doing the first ABT that we worked on was just building everything around the butt. For me, I think until you start doing that, just build everything around the butt and then build your ABT around the butt, even if it's heavy on the and heavy on the therefore, you can always go back and trim those two aspects up, but the butt's the gut punch. So I think that was the one key for me that sort of make this a little bit better and easier, and for me to develop these ABTs now. So
great. Yeah. Starting with the problem. So what is my problem? Let's put that right in the butt and then craft around that. Good. Excellent. Welcome, George. Hey, Park. Alan, let me just get them up to speed real quick.
Yeah.
What I've thrown out to the gang here is Nancy and I were talking yesterday about, as we're moving forward for the training in January with the teams, just getting insights from all of you as to what's working this round and what could be improved, and what should I hit on a little bit more. And so we'll ask this question twice. Today is just coming from initial thoughts, and then next week we'll dive in just a little bit deeper so that we can kind of co-create that training moving forward. So that's what we're up to right now. So sorry, Peg, was that you that I interrupted?
Yeah. Okay. I'm interested in what the format is going to be for this training at the meeting. Will we be, doing it just like you did it for us in these several weeks? I just want some insight, just so I can start getting my head wrapped around how we do it.
So what Nancy and I have been designing and pulling together here is, yes, doing the training with you all first to get it really dialed in. And then it's going to be a very similar training for them, for your team. You will be there to inspire them and to help push them forward and to help coach. And we're going to have some competition. with this. Quantities of stories we get every week from the teams, the quality, and we will be asking you as team leads to send us your 1 or 2 best stories that came out from that week, and we'll be sharing those throughout the week. But we will want to gather all of these stories for a big launch in March at the sales conference, when we'll hand out some rewards and awards and share the stories. And it'll be a very high level, quick go over on the training, because everybody's already going to have gone through it. So it's going to be more about celebrating the stories and where are these going to be library now that you can access them and use them. So for this training coming up, it'll really be about you all getting through it with them and then helping them. If they've got any questions, I will certainly be along, to help coach and guide too, but it'll be really just kind of leading that team and making sure that they stay involved and just kind of help through the training that way. Having said that, as you think about this, next week, we'll dig a little bit deeper in our meeting to talk about what that might look like to you all. We'll have a framework that we'll work from, and we can add and subtract from it depending on what you think is going to work best for the overall group.
Will we have like a content, something that we can, look, see off it, whatever you want to call it?
Yep. I will get
Okay,
that
good.
to you before that meeting. You'll have it there and can take a look at it. And again, that'll be our framework, but then we can add to it. But it'll be very similar, at least progression and content, as what we have done with you all, going for the 6 weeks, start with the ABT, the 5 primal elements of story, and then jump into the 4 story categories where you use these.
Cool. Okay.
Yep.
Tracy, you're on mute. Can't hear you.
Tracy, did you have? No, I can't hear you. Yeah, it says your mic's live, but we can't hear you on this end. I don't know. Once he gets that fixed, anybody else?
Tracy. Okay.
Tracy, maybe you can call in for the voice or for
Yeah.
your.
Give that a go.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun losing connection, whether it be video, audio, or both.
Exactly.
See, this is Tracy in real life. What you don't realize, she's driving with her knees not looking right now. Exactly.
Trying to put the headphones on.
Yeah. Around a curve, even past a truck filled with concrete.
Can you hear me now?
Hey.
Nice.
Wow.
Alan, and I, it's funny because it's now been 4 years that I've been with Medela, and Alan has worked with me for those 4 years, and he's been in the car with me, so Alan knows exactly what's happening right now.
Multitasker extraordinaire.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to second what Josh said. I think, I personally, at least when I'm giving an exercise, I focus so much on how it sounds and how it's written and the verbiage of it. And, I start almost looking at it from a grammatical standpoint. I think it's so important for us to make sure that everybody understands the impact that it can make, because these stories you guys have told, I've learned so much about you guys, and I appreciate you so much more as professionals and friends and stuff. And I think, just making sure that everybody understands that, yes, obviously you want to write this and you want it to be an exercise, but practice it on each other as we all do here, because I think that's important. You sit down and you start to write it and you don't realize the gravity of what you're telling. And sometimes it comes off better, mine didn't, but in a video, or just when you're in front of the customer. And so I think that's important for us to just stress to everybody as we roll this out that, this is truly beneficial, and it can make a huge impact, especially when you just go for the gusto, like the butt, like Josh was saying.
Yeah, Tracy, not being scripted, right? So you
Exactly.
have a script, but you want to make sure you're conveying the emotional connection to it.
Thank you. Yes, Christina, absolutely.
But I really think that, the main focus, and I think the reason for this is to get our library of these stories. So we have them, in our mind when we're in a situation with a customer and, you know, a question comes up, oh, we can go back to each other's stories.
Yeah, an
So,
arsenal, right?
yeah, I think this is really going to be beneficial.
Yeah. And what we're looking at for that, the Medela Momentum Library of Stories is, as we're catching these selfie video stories, and by the way, those are fantastic. I mean, the lighting on them are good. The sound quality is good. You don't have to do anything more production, value for us on this end. So by shooting those and texting them to me seems to be working really well. And you're exactly right. In almost every use, it is going to be an oral storytelling situation. It's not going to be written down. So it's getting those stories so you can quickly tell them and hit on the real highlights, the big points on them. And that's what I've been coaching with you. The funny thing about it is, almost to a person, when you guys send it to me or we get on the phone, a Zoom session, it'll say, I'm not really sure if this is that great of a story or not, but let me just share it with you. And then it's like, it's amazing. I mean, so whatever you do, don't discount your stories. We all have a habit to doing that. I do that myself. But they are really powerful because they're the truth. They're what you experienced. And when you tell them, well, your audience they're just leaning in and going, okay, yeah, I totally get it. So please don't discount your stories. If you think you have a fantastic one, tell it. If you think you have a lame one, tell it. You might be surprised. That lame one might be even more powerful than that fantastic one. Let your audience be the judge of that. That's the only thing I can say is we tend to discount our stories when they are really, really powerful. So this is great. So in that, what the hope is for the library, we're still working through it. We'll get a video, and from that video, we're going to try to create 3 or 4 different pieces of content. And I'm talking a 2-minute story. I mean, nothing long, just, you got it down, share that video so that you and your team can access it at any time to remind themselves of your story and to trigger their own stories. We will then have an audio version of that. And we could put them in almost like a little miniature Medela podcast, one after another. And we'll have them, for each of the pillars, different categories. And so if you're preparing for a sales call or you've got someone new you're training, they can just listen to these stories. Don't have to be watching them. Just plug them in and listen. And again, it's learning the storytelling, triggering their own stories and starting to capture their stories. Then we'll have a written form of them just so you can quickly peruse them somewhere. And what we're talking about too is having some little call outs, some really great priceless lines that you could call out and use in presentations and that kind of thing. They're great for, the visual prompting to help take your audience, your prospect along, and also for you to help you prompt you through the story. So our idea is one story can lead to 4 or 5 different kinds of content that will be good for coaching and teaching and use, in your stories. So that's kind of the plan of attack, and teaching the entire team, how do you go and capture these stories in the wild, and then, categorize them. So you've got very easy access to them. That's kind of the plan.
Cool.
All right. Well, let's jump into today and hear the 3 stories from our volunteers, and just talk a little bit about the influence story. And then next week, I'll get the framework of what we're thinking about with the overall training out to you in advance of next Tuesday's session. And we'll go over it and chat about it with Nancy next week as well. All right. Let me dive in here real quick. Okay, here we are. Week 5, that moment of influence. And, take a lead from Larry here. What I mean by that moment of influence now is that plus minus sign. So your customer's just given you an objection, an anti-story, we call it in the story world, as to why what you're proposing isn't going to work with them. The only way you can overcome that negative anti-story is with a positive story to influence them, to get them to see the world your way. So with influence here, that's all I really mean, is that you are persuading, you are changing their mind, you are influencing them to see it your way. So just as a quick reminder again, that and button therefore and the 5 primal elements of story are just simply the applied science. These are the frameworks that I just want you to keep incorporating in your life all the time. And then these story categories are how you use them to be with your audiences, with that moment of connection, You know, that the very first time, all you're trying to do is build a bond between you and that stranger sitting across from you. That new prospect, that person that knows nothing about you. The idea here is to tell a story about a moment of connection in your life that it builds trust. They see why you do what you do. And then as you're going through the sales process, now you have that moment of insight. And what I mean here, of course, is how things are changing. You know, you used to do it this way, but this has changed. Now you should be, doing it our way. And here's what the future looks like. So that's where the idea of insight comes from. And then today is, that moment of influence, because once you share your insight, the human nature is to push back. Say, yeah, that sounds good, but it can't possibly work here. Yeah, that sounds fine. We've tried that. It just doesn't work here. So that's where you come to this third story category of moment of influence. Now, maybe you don't get that pushback and you don't have to use that, and you can move right into a success story if needed, which we will cover next week. But this is about overcoming objections. And it's just that basic process. And so today we are going to hear from, we've got in order, Elizabeth, Josh, and then Cindy. If that works for you all, let me get off this and back to you. And like we did the week before, we worked with them on hearing their stories of influence and how they helped overcome an anti-story or a story of objection. So Elizabeth, why don't we start with yours, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So mine actually starts with that connection moment, and then it kind of builds into the influences you and I discussed. So it's actually constantly an evolving story and just a work in progress. But I always start kind of with my personal story with Medela and negative pressure, and just how I was a medical device rep for over 20 years working in the operating room. So of course I knew KCI was this huge leader and giant in negative pressure wound therapy. And I knew Medela because I'm a mother, and I knew that they were a big world leader for their breast pump portfolio. So I'd heard of both these names. And when I heard that Medela was going to innovate on that standard of care, and they were also offering a way to provide a more predictable spend to the negative pressure space, I knew it was something that I wanted to be a part of. So when I first started working for Medela, I was working with Geisinger Health System. They had already mentioned that they were interested in a more predictable spend, and also that transition piece that Medela could offer for the post-acute discharge. So I started doing a couple cases with Dr. Sook, who is an orthopedic surgeon, who also partners with supply chain to be a clinical voice for the value analysis teams there. And we started doing a couple cases, and everything went fine with the cases. They went great. But I still couldn't shake that just something was missing. On the other end, supply chain was working towards potentially moving towards like a bigger size trial. But I just knew something was off. I couldn't get into some of the big players for negative pressure. For example, the plastics division wouldn't even meet with me. And I knew they had one of the biggest users for negative pressure in that hospital system. And so one day, like during my off time, as I typically do for fun, which is going to sound a little strange, but I actually enjoy reading healthcare supply chain magazines, I stumbled across this article. And here it was, Dr. Sook, this provider that I'm working with, actually had written an article that I was reading. And I'm going to read exactly the title. It was Physician Collaboration as the Key to Effective Supply Chain Management. So I'm like, oh my gosh, that's it. He's working with value analysis to be a clinical voice. And here I am, not sure if anybody's ever sold him clinically on our pump yet. I was newer to the company, so I happened to know kind of around when he sat and where he sat for lunch. So I made myself available one day and went up to show him the article that I read it and congratulated him on it being published in this magazine. And he invited me to sit down. So we started kind of discussing it. And I said, speaking about your article, have you ever, do you know why clinically Medela is a better option than, KCI, or is it just because of this predictable spend? And I know you're looking to partner with a supply chain for certain procedures to reduce the cost, but is there a clinical reason that, you would like to use Medela or that you chose them? And he said no. He thought it was just the same. And so I went into our intelligent pressure control and dynamic exudate removal, which for this group of people, I don't have to dive in. We all know that story really well. But for my customers, this might be where I would elaborate on that. Anyway, so I sold him on dynamic exudate removal. And he said, wow, like this is something all the other providers who touch negative pressure really need to hear about. And that's kind of when we shifted to Geisinger then decided to have a big wound care summit so we could get all the bigger specialties for wound care in. So that took place in March, and everybody knows COVID happened, so that slowed a lot down. And recently we were just told that they would like to do something virtual in January. So again, it's kind of evolving, but really I start with myself and my story because I'm thinking why I joined Medela is really the same reason that our customers should be using it. You know, we have this a great name for medical vacuum suction, the world leader for breast pump portfolio, and they offer this, you know, predictable spend, and they're changing the way negative pressure is done by innovating on that standard of care. So that's my story.
That's great. Thank you, Elizabeth. I love your connection story when you first shared it with me last week, because I like that intersection of practitioner and parent. And you and I talked a lot about that. So you're in the OR and you see the need for this, and then you're at home with your kids and you're using Medela in a completely different way. And all of a sudden those two worlds come together, you know? So to me, let me throw it out to the gang here. Have you heard Elizabeth's connection story before? And what do you think of it? How's it land for you all?
No, I had not heard it, and it landed very comfortably. The way it was couched made me kind of join the ride with her. I liked it.
Oh.
Very authentic. Absolutely. You could tell that it was real. And it was an easy way to connect with you as an individual and a professional. So very cool. Way to go.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, can you share the name of the publication? That's the supply chain management
The article
magazine, because I didn't even know those things existed.
Oh yeah, for sure. I have a couple downstairs, so I'll definitely send an email out to the team on that. He actually just recently wrote a new one that I saw on LinkedIn. So sometimes I share them or I like them on LinkedIn too. But he's big on speaking on why physicians and supply chain should collaborate for moving forward a hospital system and decision making. So
I mean, because what a great connection to those, let's say, supply chain people with a little less personality than those in the OR, and a great way to kind of connect the dots. I mean, that's fantastic. I think that's super creative. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful. You guys, everybody knows the dynamic now between like purchasing and the providers. It's a big arm wrestling match, and so I think it's where's the common line or the commonalities, or where do they join up and work together. I think that's huge. So it's more or less a provider saying, hey, I'm willing to work with the folks that are cutting the checks and trying to do the best for the patient. So I think that's something we all struggle with and we see every day. So that's huge. Please share that with the team. I'd love to see that too.
Sure. Yeah. The other thing for me is I think, when you're meeting with supply chain or administration, sometimes they're all excited about this cost savings, but an objection might be like, but we've had a company before come in and none of the doctors are on board. So like, it's just not going to work for us. Like the money sounds great, but this is a great example of like, hey, this hospital was actually looking to do or find that predictable spend. I thought this doctor was already on board with like clinically why, and it turns out like he really didn't even know. He was just kind of doing it as a me too, which we all know could fail terribly. If we're just another me too, we got to sell clinically as well. So this just goes to show the impact of our dynamic exudate removal, our innovation award with Vizient, and like we just share like what our clinical side is as well, and how we're able to switch some big providers. I mean, the plastics guy was the one having the most questions. Lita was at this meeting with me and we were just looking at each other like, yes, we finally got our 3 minutes in front of him. And this is why we knew he just needed to hear us. So, yeah.
I see a KOL in our future.
Right.
Right? Hopefully.
Well, another good example of Elizabeth's story, Eric, is you illustrated that for us. unaware of that particular publication. So these stories are learning tools. Elizabeth, what is very commonplace to you may not be to your colleagues. And so we all do that too, is we think, well, this is our story. Everybody knows this stuff. And you find out when you share a story, it's like, no, I even if it's like maybe a really sought after author or publication or whatever, we presume everybody knows this. And I have had that happen so many times. I share something and they're like, where did you find that? Who's that writer? And I'm surprised I don't know about it. And then I have to remember that we individually are so drilled in and dialed into what we do that a lot of times the rest of the folks around us don't realize how they can benefit from our knowledge or what we know. So just a great example of you sharing a story on how to use an influence story, but then also the education that came out of that for the rest of your team with that one publication. So that's another thing that's very powerful with, you know, telling your story and telling it often, because you never know how you're going to impact people out there. I was going to ask you, Elizabeth, last thing, if you could identify what was Dr. Suk's primary anti-story that you had to overcome. You could just sum it up as briefly as possible.
Well, again, I think it really has more to do with like a supply chain conversation. Like we'll get a lot of objections. Yeah, the cost savings or this predictable spend looks good. However, you guys are not going to convert our doctors. Our doctors are special. They, you know, whatever. That's heard quite often. So for me, this one really goes to like, yeah, we can. And here's an example of one that I did convert. In fact, you know, anyways, once I get into that, you know, he wrote that article about physician collaboration, and he and I weren't even having that clinical discussion. I had to sit down and bring it up to him.
Yeah.
So
one thing for all of you, now that you're learning these categories of stories, and oh, by the way, you guys already tell them. So it's not like you're inventing them. I'm just kind of like bringing them to the surface and anchoring them in your mind so that you can strategically be ready to have them. Even though you may intuitively do this, I just want you to intentionally do it, because then you've got them at the ready. So anytime you're going into, you know, a presentation, depending on if maybe they know you, maybe they don't know you or whatever, you can kind of line out those 4 stories. Okay, I'm going to do a connection. If needed, I'm going to do a connection story about this. The main point I want to cover, you know, in that insight story of what has changed to set up the sell for us is this. And so with that, I'm going to have this, maybe this story or this story in my back pocket, depending on what reaction I get from them. Now, in the past, they've always pushed back on this. So I'm going to have 1 or 2 of these stories on an influence story to help overcome their anti-story about it. And then if need be, I'll have a quick little success story at the end of it that here we helped someone just like you that wanted the exact same thing you did. And here's what the outcome looks like. You have them all in your arsenal. You may only use 1 of them. You might not even need to have all 4 of them, but when you program your brain to get in there, you've got them ready to go. And the more you do it, the better you get at it, the less you actually have to think about it. As when that objection comes up, boy, that perfect influence story pops in your mind and you know where to go with it. So that's all we're doing here, because it's obvious that you guys are really good at sales, and the stories I'm getting from you tells me you already have these stories in your arsenal. All I'm doing is revealing them and giving you a category so that you can intentionally use them and strategically moving forward.
And Park, you want people to be intentional storytellers versus what was the alternative? Intuitive.
So think about it like this: instead of winging it, go in with a plan.
All right.
You know, we all wing it. We've done it our whole lives. And the best way I can explain it from where it really impacted me is when I had 2 TV commercials we produced for Goodwill of Central Arizona. One pulled phenomenally, like store sales were up 40%. One did not pull at all. And this was before my study in the storytelling. When I went back and looked at it, I realized, oh my God, this one has perfect story structure. We intuitively told a story without thinking about it. This one was just a creative masterpiece. We're going to win a bunch of awards for it. And gee, aren't we creative? Well, it had no meaning to it. And when I look back on it, I go, oh, what if I could make 2 TV commercials and they both pulled at that 40% rate? I need to be intentional about it. I can't just wing it and be lucky 50% of the time. If I use these frameworks and go in with this intention and just get them so indoctrinated in my brain that I don't actually have to think about them, they automatically come up, I find my success rate goes way, way, way up. So I'm not teaching you anything you don't know intuitively. You're already really good at it. All I just want you to do is have a plan and use it every single time, because your competition, for the most part, doesn't. They are selling and winging and just going for it. And that was my own experience. So how can you be successful way more often? You got to be intentional about it. My thought. No. All right, Josh, you're up.
Yes, sir.
Jump on
All
in.
right. So my story takes place about a year, just over a year or so ago. I think I was a week or so out of sales training, level 1 foundations. I think the exact date's like October 4th, 2019. We secured a meeting at ProMedica Health, which is a small IDN in Toledo, at the corporate office at the corporate level, with the clinical value analysis contracts manager, Brooke Bowen. So general introduction. I'm like a few weeks out of sales training, lucky to get this meeting with these people that are interested in cost savings. And, we're doing general introductions and talking about general features and benefits of the products. And we get to a point in the conversation where we talk about less noise and whisper quiet. I think we were doing our 10-minute demo, and we got sort of a, not like a kickback, but like sort of a, just like let's go back and check. And so the clinical value analysis coordinator, Brooke, it came from a wound care background, and she was actually like the vascular wound care director for all these years prior to taking the value analysis position. And so she's like, well, let me sort of let you know that I think my perspective on all these negative pressure wound therapy systems, that they're all noisy in some way, shape, or form. And in particular, I got a story to tell you. And so she sort of cut us off at the knees. And so she started to tell us that she was at a funeral for a family member about a month ago. And they were in the eulogy, and her uncle, who was on negative pressure, his device started to leak air. So you guys all know what that sounds like. I mean, it's like, and then the device starts to alarm. So, here they are in the middle of the funeral, and it's her uncle, and he's like three pews back. And obviously, his saving grace is that she's a wound care nurse. And so she was able to, he's trying to be discreet about it. When it started to alarm, she had to take him out of the room and get his film sealed and get him back to normal. And then so she said all these systems, even when they're operating at a normal fashion, or when they do decide to leak or alarm, that they're pretty noisy. And I was like, oh, I get what you're saying, and that's thank you for sharing that story. And at the very end of that sentence or that conversation, she asked us to turn on our devices so she could hear how loud they were at normal operating function. I said, Brooke, they've been on the entire meeting, that since I walked into the room before you stepped, and she didn't believe it. So I put the devices in her hand, and then she was just blown away. She's like, I didn't know that these devices at normal operating levels could be so quiet. And so it basically instant validation to her that what she said in her mind was not what it is today. And we still talk about that conversation every time we go in and we meet virtually, or we meet like in person. So so I mean, it was just I couldn't even script that at all. And fortunately for me, if you want to fact check me, Shelly McElfresh was in the room right next to me, and we couldn't believe what had just transposed right in that conversation. But all is well, and we're progressing with them, and so they're still interested, and we're in the midst of the cost savings, and so we're advancing the ball with ProMedica, and we always share that story because I think it's a funny story to share. So.
You were delivered a gift from the universe, the sales gods, and that your prospect shared a particular story like that you could then play off of. And then to have that demo actually happening right there, she didn't even realize it. I mean, come on, that's fantastic.
I was shaking my head. Like I looked at Shelly, and I'm like, and I looked at Brooke, and I'm like, these devices, both Liberty and Motion, have been on since the inception of when I got in here to set these up, and she was like blown away. So I'm like, yeah. So.
Well, Josh, you've told that story before, and I want you to know that I have used that. I know Park talks about us learning from each other, but I've done a bunch of these recently for this small group that is going to move with us, and every one of them, I'd go in a little early, set it up, and I'd run it the whole time, and I'd always bring it up. And but I think I learned that from you. I think this story you've told before. Anyway, so thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's
I'm gonna use the funeral angle. I love that.
I mean,
Thanks,
that's
Josh.
again, that was true, you know, like she was like, they were in the midst of the actual eulogy and it started to leak and then it alarmed. And then she was like trying to get back to like, they were like 2 or 3 pews back. And so she got him isolated and got him out of there. And, you know, I don't know, he had whatever he had on him, she was able to make it work. But I mean, she was like, you know what she said in that context is that she was like, it was quite embarrassing for him. And she's sitting there watching him, you know, like it's making the noise. And obviously like people are listening and they're wondering what that noise is. And then when it alarmed, she knew like she had to get over there. And so, yeah, it was, I mean, I think about that in my mind, like, you know, it's sort of like, there's no, it's not discreet, you know, like when those things happen, then people know that like, there's something like you got like either a colostomy bag or something, you know? So, yeah, I mean, that was resounding to me. I'm glad you guys, I think I've told it to a handful of people, obviously the people in my region. I think I might've shared it with Larry just being, because we've talked and corresponded post training. And, yeah, I think, I'm glad that I would use it. Feel free to use it at any time. I think it's a great story and it's profound. So
Patient experience personified or exemplified or highlighted.
Have the rest of you, have you heard that story before? Is this new to you?
Oh, it's
I've
new.
heard similar.
Yeah, new for me.
Good for me. I loved it. Yeah.
Enjoyed it.
That specific story is new, but the idea of having the pump on when you walk in that's part of our onboarding training as well. So I'm glad to see that you're following it, Josh, and that it ended up paying off and created that story. We know that's a significant advantage in terms of the quality of our device. And we've always recommended our team have that up, on, and running when they walk in, because it is a big wow once you let them know that the pump had been running the entire time you had the meeting and they couldn't hear it. So for me, it's almost, it's gratifying to hear that story because, you know, we train like to do this, but as trainers, we don't get to experience the outcome. So it kind of hits real nice when I'm hearing that story that, you know, you used it and it does have an impact. It has an impact, not just on sales, but also on the patient satisfaction. So I think, I love this story. First time I heard the story, but, you know, please team, bring us more. We love to hear them.
Yeah, it's a fantastic story. Josh, thanks so much for sharing that.
Welcome.
All right, Cindy, last but of course not least, heard your story yesterday. It's a fun one. So why don't jump on and share your story with the gang.
All right, I'll do as you suggested. So here's the setup, guys. This was actually a recent story that happened right before the Thanksgiving holiday. Dr. Pam Johnson, she was the lead. And interestingly enough, this lead actually called me. I didn't reach out to her. And she called me inquiring about advanced dressings. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but down in South Florida, most of the practices are essentially closed off down there, and, you know, vendors can't go in there. So they've had to do a lot of different things because of the pandemic. She happens to be an internal medicine, family medicine type of physician, pretty much takes care of minor types of things, but not wound care. And all of a sudden, she's taking care of wounds. She's noticing these patients aren't returning back for their second, third visits. They're scared. And then at a certain point, she told me, Cindy, these wounds are horrible. You know, they're horrible, and they expect me to work miracles. And she said that, which was kind of impactful for me. She said that she was on the internet, she was Googling things, and, you know, just a whole bunch of information. She's reaching out to companies, and nobody was answering her call. And she was really genuinely surprised when I picked up the phone. So she was telling me about this stage 3 pressure ulcer that was continuing to get worse. And the patient had home health, but she decided to put that home health on hold because the wound was getting worse. And because her clinic wasn't full on, she actually decided to start making home visits, which was new to her as well. And she goes, you know what? These people can't handle anything out here. She was using a product called Polymem foam. And I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but pretty much it's a glorified piece of gauze that you just cut to fit the wound and slap some adhesive on it. And her colleague happened to say, hey, how about you call the wound vac company? And because you can't keep up this pace, you can't do your clinic and you can't do all these home care visits. And that's pretty much the setup. So the call went like this. She gets on the phone, we're yakking. I told her all this stuff. And I said, Dr. Johnson, I appreciate your inquiry for more advanced knowledge on more advanced dressings and the resources that might make your job easier. But I want to make sure you're aware that you're talking to Medela. We manufacture negative pressure wound therapy, but we're not KCI. And there was this dead silence. It was like pretty much a mistake, I think, that she called me. But she says, oh, it's okay. I called you. And I said, well, you shared that the pandemic was presenting challenges for you and your patients, that you didn't have access to wound supplies, and that you're afraid that your patients in the home aren't getting the proper care that they needed and what you expect, and you're visiting these patients at home. And I said, I definitely understand that. Therefore, if you have a minute, I'd like to discuss another option that might work for you in your situation. And I proceeded to talk about our innovation story. We make MPWT easier, all of that good stuff. And again, she paused. She's a good pauser, by the way. She goes, Cindy, I'm very familiar with negative pressure, but MPWT is not a viable option for me or for my patient because they can't get that care that they need. And so I just asked her to tell me about that. And she goes, well, I'm fully aware of negative pressure from my residency. Those dressings take too long to apply, and I don't trust the nurses out in the field to take care of these patients. And I'm like, well, Dr. Johnson, I definitely understand your hesitation, and I do know where you're coming from. Back when I was working in the units, those wound nurses would take a couple hours to do their dressing changes, and it really looked difficult. And mind you, this was like 15 plus years ago when we were doing negative pressure. And I go, believe me, I didn't become a nurse to do wound care, but now I am. And so I proceeded to tell her, I'm like, look, negative pressure's changed over the years, and there's been much innovation. And in most cases, MPWT application dressings don't take as long as they used to. And we may have, more ways to help you by educating those nurses in the field. And we can do that for you as well. And I'm like, if I can educate on MPWT and provide pump and application options, would that be of interest to you? And ironically, Dr. Johnson agreed. She wanted to be more informed. And after I was done taking care of that, she gave me the opportunity to put my words into action. And she gave me a referral. It was a pretty cool call. That's it, Park.
Thank you, Cindy. And I liked how your connection story came in, after that initial connection, because it sounds like she called thinking she was getting KCI, and surprise, it's Medela, and you were able to convert her, or to at least get her to see your way of thinking. But it really, your connection story played the part of an influence story at this point, or at least setting it up. so that the other thing that I like what you did too, is it sounds like she gave you the download of the problem that she was having. You just sat and listened to copious notes and then replied back to her what you heard to build that trust, so that you make sure that you are on track with what is going through her mind, and then jumped into MPWT, your experience with it in a connection story. And then the influence story comes in and talking about how technology has changed, and actually these nurses in the field can do a much better job than they used to. Is
Yes.
that about right?
It is. And it's, I'm like, hey, this this whole storytelling stuff actually works on the telephone. I surprised myself, to be honest. And I do credit being on this team here, because I think we all are good sellers. It gave me more structure, and I kind of felt it was more critical, especially on the telephone, to really listen and to put structure, if that's a good word to use, structure to my story.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, gang, time to weigh in. What'd you think of Cindy's story?
Be easy.
No, I think it was awesome. Awesome. And I loved how you and Josh and Beth too, it prompted the customer to tell their stories. So it was just this great back and forth, with stories, and then bring it all to a connection. Yeah, it was awesome. And I agree with you on the phone. There's something about, I don't know what it is. You can just take your time more when you're on the phone. You're not distracted you're just not distracted. I agree with you, Cindy.
Right, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, I love the fact that you threw in the phrase the doctor started Googling. I think it humanizes doctors, because we've all at one point or another run into that doc where we just think he or she is on this pedestal and they can do nothing wrong. And the bottom line is that they don't know everything, and they constantly need to be reminded of things or educated on things. And that just refreshed that phrase that I was thinking of. Man, like, doctors, they don't know everything, and they will never know everything. That's why we're here. And so it just kind of made that connection for me.
Eric, I think Jody just gave you a point on the whiteboard from onboarding.
Give me 2.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But yeah, I agree, Eric. And going back to Beth's story with Dr. Sook, I was involved with Beth. I mean, when you talk about ego, this guy, he is the definition of an egotistical surgeon.
Edging good out.
He was, and he admitted, he didn't know. Yeah, it was awesome. And the way Beth, I'll say, quote, played him. She didn't play him, but she read him, and was not afraid to say, hey, do you really know what we're talking about? Yeah. Awesome.
So my comment to the team, Park, is that I don't know if they realize it, but in every story, there's a constructive tension that has occurred, which is part of our challenger model. So you're telling a story, but you're actually at the reframe when you start your story. And in that reframe, as you start to give them information, you're creating that constructive tension, which is that rational drowning. And then what Park's really honing in on with this is that emotional impact. So when you feel that emotion come on when you're hearing these stories, that is the impact you're looking for that customer to obtain. And so what I've been very kind of listening into these calls is, kind of making sure everything kind of follows our pathway. And what has been brilliant with Kevin, Nancy, and the team bringing in Park is we really aren't good. If you remember going through training, and I actually admit this, that emotional impact, it's hard to get that emotion at that turning point so we can kind of show them the new way, right? The Medela way. And so we're this hyper focus on storytelling is really so that emotional impact, which is the only time when you get a customer to turn your way, that's what we're honing in on. And I've seen it brilliantly done just 3 times here today. But I want to remind the team, just by following this process, you have the natural warmer, you've kind of got your reframe in place, even if it's the anti-story. So you might come in there saying, hi, I'm with Medela, and they hit you right away with the anti-story. Well, that's your reframe. You guys are reframing as you're given that story. And then as you bring more data and more points of interest in, that's the rational drowning. And then that turn, that pivot point that Park's focused on is that emotional impact. And so by doing this and doing this well, the value you're bringing to your ability to sell faster, to shorten your sales cycle, all focuses in on this emotional impact part of the curve. It's because it's the lowest point, and you're either going to stay low and never go back up, or you're going to turn them around the curve. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, Park, because it falls in line with our Challenger mantra of trying to, get to that constructive tension. And this, I think they've all done that today.
Yeah. Yeah. And really the stories we've been working on the whole time have done a good job with that. And that is the importance, believe it or not, of the ABT, because the ABT gets that narrative intuition of that constructive tension with the but. And the more you work, it's like tackling and blocking, to use a football analogy. You get that ABT down, use it everywhere, your stories will start falling into and naturally amplify that constructive tension. So find the hurt, amplify the pain, heal the wound. That's all you're doing here at this point. But the one other thing, Alan, great points along there. I would also add, it will, I believe, help you accelerate your sales. It also creates pretty amazing customer bonding, because if you can bond over an emotional story, get them to laugh, get them to not cry, but, really feel something with you down the road, when you're looking for re-ups or expanding the program or whatever, that's what I found is don't discount that. It really creates this bond between you and that person sitting across from you. So you are no longer just a provider, but you're a partner in helping them, with their care. And that's just a really nice added value to storytelling. All right. Excellent. Any other thoughts, any other questions on the influence story? And then, of course, I would love to have 3 more volunteers for next week to work with me. And this is probably the simplest framework of them all. It's that success story. Someone just like you wanted something like you want, and we delivered. And now this is what it looks like in their world. As simple as that is, they can be kind of tricky to tell. So do I have 3 of you? And if I have a repeat volunteer, that's great too, that I would love to work with you this week on those. Share them next week. And then as we round out, finish up our sessions next week, we will talk about what the training looks like with your teams, in addition to working through the success moments. So
Yeah, Park, I'll volunteer. I haven't done it yet.
Excellent. Thanks, Eric. Two others?
I will. Peg, I will.
Peg? All right. One more.
I'll re-up.
Great. Thanks, Larry. I will send you all my schedule so you can find 15 minutes that works for you later this week. I will get this recording up on your resource page. Of course, if you have any questions whatsoever throughout the week, you've got my email. Shoot me a note. Be happy to follow up with you on that. And that's all I've got for you today, unless you've got any last questions for me.
I just want to confirm next week, the 22nd, we still have a call, right?
Yes, we do. Oh, by the way, thank you for that, Peg. I sent out an invite to everyone, and then Nancy told me this morning that there was a problem with that invite. So did you guys not get that for next week on the 22nd?
No, we got them. I think what the concern is that it was Google Calendar based and we're Outlook based, so it would not merge. It wouldn't show up. Anyway, we all got them, Park, but it just wasn't in Outlook format. It was in Google. So
okay. In the past, though, were you able to, for the first 6 sessions, one of the first ones I sent out, did that work, or was that a problem? Because
that worked.
About it.
That worked.
That one worked. All right.
This one actually came through as a Google Calendar request, and it was a different format than what we kind of do internally and whatever.
Then here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to re-invite you. So go ahead and cancel out of those. It was probably on my end. I did a duplicate of the meeting, put it up for next week, and then sent it out. And I wonder in that duplicate process if Google gets wacky with it. So I'm just going to do a complete clean invite for that. And we also have one for the 5th after the holiday. And that one is really just to finalize the training, moving on with your teams and everything that's going to happen. So that one on the 5th may only be about a half hour long. But in both cases, I will resend those as fresh invites, and hopefully that'll get through any Outlook problem.
Great.
All right.
Cool.
Sounds good. Well,
Thank
thanks
you,
all.
Park.
Have a great
Thank
week.
you.
We'll see you
Thanks,
next
Bart.
Tuesday.
Thanks, everybody. Have
Thanks,
a good
Barb.
week.
Thanks.
Have a good
Bring
week.
on. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bring on.